The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Nora Sullivan stood defiant, her wrists raw and bleeding from the iron shackles that bound her to the wooden post in Redemption Springs' dusty town square. The year was 1875, and a woman with opinions was considered more dangerous than a rattlesnake in these parts. Sweat trickled down her face, mingling with dried tears as she lifted her chin higher, refusing to show weakness to the gathering crowd. They had been parading past her since dawn, some spitting at her feet, others hurling insults that stung worse than the summer heat. Her crime: standing up to Judge Montgomery when he sentenced a young Mexican boy to hang for stealing a loaf of bread. "Water," she croaked, her voice barely audible after hours without relief. The townspeople merely laughed, turning away from her suffering. "Ain't nobody helping a troublemaker like you," Sheriff Pike sneered, adjusting his badge that glinted cruelly in the sunlight. "Maybe a night out here will teach you some proper manners." Nora closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry again. At 23, she had already endured more than most women twice her age. Orphaned at 16, she'd made her way as a schoolteacher, determined to bring education to this lawless corner of Arizona territory. But her progressive ideas had earned her more enemies than friends. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her open her eyes. A cloud of dust preceded the arrival of a stranger on a magnificent black stallion. The crowd parted as the horse came to a stop directly before her. Tall and broad-shouldered, the rider dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but she could see eyes as green as spring grass studying her intently. A leather vest stretched across his chest, and twin colts rested on his hips, worn but well-maintained. "What's this about?" His voice was deep, with the hint of a southern drawl. Sheriff Pike stepped forward, hand hovering near his gun. "None of your business, stranger. Just teaching a woman her place." The man approached Nora slowly, taking in her torn dress, the dried blood on her wrists, and the defiance still burning in her eyes despite her exhaustion. "What's your name, miss?" he asked quietly. "Nora Sullivan," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. He nodded once, then turned to face the sheriff. "What's her crime?" "Interference with justice, disrespect to the court, general troublemaking," Pike listed off, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Judge says she stays there till tomorrow noon." Without warning, the stranger drew a knife from his boot. Several onlookers gasped, and the sheriff reached for his pistol. But instead of threatening anyone, the man moved behind the post and cut through the ropes binding her shackles to the wood. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Pike demanded, drawing his gun. The stranger turned, one hand resting casually on his holster, the other supporting Nora as she stumbled, her legs weak from standing for hours. "She's with me," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You can't just—" Pike began. "I said," the stranger repeated, his hand now firmly on his pistol, "she's with me. Anyone who has a problem with that can settle it now." His eyes swept the crowd, challenging each face he encountered. No one moved. "Now, I believe the lady needs water and rest," he continued, helping Nora toward his horse. "And I'd appreciate if someone could find the key to these shackles." After a tense moment, Judge Montgomery himself pushed through the crowd, a small iron key clutched in his pudgy hand. "This is highly irregular," he sputtered. "So is chaining a woman to a post in the desert sun," the stranger replied evenly, taking the key. As he freed her wrists, Nora finally got a good look at her rescuer's face. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw lined with stubble and a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection she couldn't explain. "Thank you," she whispered as he helped her onto his horse. "But you don't know me. Why would you risk yourself like this?" He mounted behind her, his arms encircling her waist as he took the reins. "Name's Garrett Lane," he said, ignoring her question. "And I believe we should be on our way before these fine citizens reconsider their hospitality." As they rode out of town, Nora leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to maintain her usual independence. She didn't know who this man was or what would happen next, but for the first time in days she felt safe. "Where are we going?" she asked as Redemption Springs disappeared behind them. "I've got a camp set up in the foothills," Garrett replied. "You can rest there, decide what you want to do next." Nora nodded, her eyelids growing heavy despite the jolting gait of the horse. "They'll come looking for me," she murmured. "The judge doesn't like losing." "Let them come," Garrett said simply, and there was something in his tone that made her believe he could handle whatever pursuit might follow. As they rode into the growing dusk, Nora Sullivan didn't know that this day, the worst and best of her life, would be the beginning of a journey that would test everything she believed about justice, freedom, and love. The camp Garrett had mentioned turned out to be a small but well-established setup in a protected canyon. A lean-to sheltered a bedroll and supplies, while a small fire pit showed signs of regular use. A stream trickled nearby, providing fresh water. "It's not much," he said as he helped her down from the horse, his hands strong and steady around her waist. "But it's private. Nobody comes up here." Nora sank gratefully onto a flat rock by the fire pit, her legs still trembling. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "I can't thank you enough." Garrett busied himself with starting a fire, his movements efficient and practiced. "You can thank me by telling me why half the town was happy to see you suffer," he said, not looking up from his task. Nora sighed, running her fingers over her raw wrists. "I'm the schoolteacher, or was. I came here about a year ago, thinking I could make a difference." She gave a bitter laugh. "Turns out men like Judge Montgomery don't appreciate being questioned, especially by a woman. And that's what you did, question him. He sentenced a 12-year-old boy to hang for stealing bread," she said, anger flaring at the memory. "Miguel's family is starving since the drought killed their crops. I stood up in court and called it what it was: murder, not justice." Garrett looked up at her, firelight dancing in his green eyes. "That took courage, or foolishness," she replied. "What good did it do? Miguel is still in jail awaiting the gallows, and she gestured to her torn dress and wounded wrists. "What about the boy's family?" "His mother died last winter. Father works at the silver mine when they need extra hands, but it's barely enough." Nora's voice softened. "Miguel has 3 younger siblings. He was just trying to feed them." Garrett nodded, his expression thoughtful as he hung a small pot of coffee over the growing flames. "And you, no family to stand up for you. My parents died of fever when I was 16. I worked as a governess back east until I saved enough to get my teaching certificate. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Redemption Springs, it seemed like providence." She smiled sadly. "I should have known a town with such a righteous name would be anything but—" He handed her a tin cup of water, which she drank gratefully. "How about you?" She asked after quenching her thirst. "What brings a man like you to these parts?" Garrett's expression closed slightly. "I'm just passing through, on your way wherever the trail leads." He poured coffee into 2 battered cups and handed one to her. "I don't much plan ahead these days." Nora studied him over the rim of her cup. There was a weariness about him that spoke of hard years, yet his eyes remained alert, missing nothing. His hands, though calloused from work, handled the delicate tin cups with surprising gentleness. "You're running from something," she said quietly. It wasn't a question, his lips quirked into a half-smile. "Aren't we all?" Before she could respond, he stood and moved to his saddlebags, pulling out some jerky and hardtack. "It's not much for dinner, but it'll keep you going." "It's a feast compared to what I expected tonight," she said honestly, accepting the simple fare. They ate in companionable silence as darkness fell completely, stars appearing in breathtaking profusion overhead. The night air grew cool, and Nora couldn't suppress a shiver. Without comment, Garrett retrieved a worn blanket from his bedroll and draped it around her shoulders. His fingers brushed against her neck as he did so, causing an unexpected flutter in her stomach. "Thank you," she said, drawing the blanket tighter. "Not just for this, for everything." "Most men would have ridden past." "Most men aren't worth much then," he replied simply, settling back across the fire from her. Nora found herself studying his profile, strong and shadowed in the firelight. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked finally. "That depends on you," Garrett said. "You can't go back to Redemption Springs, not right away at least. Do you have somewhere else to go? Family in another town?" She shook her head. "No one, but I can't just abandon Miguel and the other children who need schooling. The boy's set to hang soon. 3 days from now." Garrett's expression grew thoughtful. "Then we have 2 days to figure something out." Nora raised an eyebrow. "You've done more than enough already. I can't ask you to get further involved." "You didn't ask," he pointed out, "but I'm not in the habit of leaving jobs half-finished." "I'm not a job, Mr. Lane." His eyes met hers across the flames. "No, Miss Sullivan, you certainly are not." Something in his gaze made her heart beat faster, and she looked away first. "We should get some rest," she said, suddenly acutely aware of being alone in the wilderness with a man she'd just met. "Take the bedroll," he said, gesturing to the lean-to. "I'll keep watch." "But I've slept on harder ground than this," he assured her. "Go on." Too exhausted to argue, Nora retreated to the simple shelter. The bedroll smelled of leather, horses, and something distinctly masculine that she assumed was Garrett himself. Despite her racing thoughts, the events of the day soon caught up with her, and she drifted into a deep sleep. She dreamed of standing in the town square again, but this time no one came to save her. The sun burned hotter and hotter until she thought her skin would blister and peel away. She tried to scream but had no voice. Nora. The sound of her name broke through the nightmare, and she jerked awake to find Garrett kneeling beside the bedroll, his hand on her shoulder. "You were having a bad dream," he said, his voice gentle in the darkness. She realized she was trembling, tears streaming down her face. Without thinking, she reached for him, needing human contact to ground her in reality. He hesitated only a moment before gathering her against his chest, one hand awkwardly patting her back as she cried. "I'm sorry," she hiccuped, mortified by her breakdown. Don't apologize," he interrupted. "After what you've been through, you're entitled to a few tears." Nora pulled back slightly, wiping her face with the corner of the blanket. In the faint glow of the banked fire, she could just make out Garrett's concerned expression. "I keep seeing Miguel's face," she admitted. "He was so frightened when they took him away." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "Get some more rest," he finally said. "Tomorrow we'll start figuring out how to help the boy." "You mean that?" she asked, searching his face for any sign of deception. "I don't say things I don't mean, Miss Sullivan." As he started to rise, she caught his hand. "Nora," she said. "Please call me Nora." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Good night, Nora. Good night, Garrett." She watched as he moved back to his position by the fire, settling with his back against a rock, rifle across his knees. Despite the dire circumstances, she felt an unfamiliar sense of peace knowing he was there, keeping watch. As she drifted back to sleep, Nora wondered what kind of man risked everything for a stranger, and what ghosts drove him to wander these harsh territories alone. Dawn broke with a spectacular display of color that painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. Nora awoke feeling surprisingly rested, though her wrists still throbbed painfully where the shackles had cut into them. She found Garrett by the stream, shaving with a straight razor, his shirt hanging on a nearby bush. The morning light revealed a web of scars across his back, some old and white, others still pink with relative newness. He hadn't heard her approach, and she stood frozen, unwilling to interrupt but unable to look away from the map of suffering etched into his skin. As if sensing her presence, he glanced over his shoulder, quickly reaching for his shirt when he saw her standing there. "I'm sorry," she said, turning away to give him privacy. "I didn't mean to intrude." "It's nothing," he replied, his voice gruffer than the previous evening. "There's coffee by the fire. Should still be hot." When she turned back, he was fully dressed, his expression carefully neutral as he wiped his razor on a scrap of cloth. "How are your wrists?" he asked, changing the subject. Nora extended her arms, showing the raw red circles where the iron had chafed her skin. "They'll heal," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Garrett frowned, approaching to examine the wounds more closely. "I've got some salve that might help," he said, his fingers gently turning her hands to better see the damage. "We should clean these properly." His touch was surprisingly tender for a man with such evident capacity for violence. Nora found herself studying his face as he concentrated on her injuries, the way his brow furrowed slightly, the small lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he had once smiled more often than he did now. "How did you get them?" she asked quietly. "The scars on your back." His hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their careful examination. "War leaves marks on everyone who survives it," he said simply. "You fought for the Union." A shadow crossed his face. "Confederate cavalry. Not something I'm proud of anymore, but a man can't change his past." Nora nodded, understanding better now the haunted look in his eyes. "The war ended 10 years ago. Were all those scars from battle?" Garrett released her hands and stepped back. "Some were from after," he said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. "Let me get that salve." As he rummaged through his saddlebags, Nora moved to the fire and poured herself coffee, giving him the space he clearly needed. Whatever had happened to Garrett Lane after the war, it wasn't something he was ready to share with a woman he'd just met, no matter how quickly circumstances had forced them into intimacy. He returned with a small tin and a clean cloth. "This might sting," he warned as he began to clean her wounds with water from his canteen. Nora bit her lip but didn't pull away. After the pain of the shackles themselves, this discomfort was nothing. "You have steady hands," she observed as he worked. "Like a doctor." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My father was a physician in Charleston. I picked up a few things before I disappointed him by choosing horses over healing. And now you're helping both," she said softly. His eyes flicked up to meet hers, surprise evident in their green depths. "I suppose I am," he agreed, applying the salve with gentle strokes. "Though Pa would say this hardly qualifies as medical practice." "It's more than most would do," she countered. He finished bandaging her wrists with strips torn from a clean shirt, his movements efficient but careful. "There," he said, sitting back on his heels. "That should help. Thank you." Nora flexed her hands experimentally, relieved to find the bandages allowed for movement while protecting the raw skin. "So what's our plan for today? You mentioned helping Miguel." Garrett nodded, moving to pour himself more coffee. "First, we need information. I'll ride into a trading post about an hour from here safer than going back to Redemption Springs. See what I can learn about the situation." "I'm coming with you," Nora said immediately. "No," he replied, his tone brooking no argument. "You're too recognizable, and if the sheriff has men looking for you, they'll check every settlement in riding distance." She wanted to protest but knew he was right. "What should I do then? Just wait here, rest, recover your strength." He gestured to his saddlebags. "There's paper and pencil in there if you want to write down anything that might help details about the town, the judge, the jail where they're keeping the boy." Nora nodded reluctantly. "Be careful," she said, "if they connect you to my escape." "I'm always careful," he assured her, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Been shot at by better men than Sheriff Pike." He prepared to leave, checking his weapons and securing his hat against the growing heat of the day. Before mounting, he hesitated, turning back to her with an unreadable expression. "Nora," he said, his voice low and serious. "If I'm not back by nightfall, there's a map in my saddlebag marking the way to a ranch owned by a man named Henderson. He's a fair sort, he'll help you get to safety if needed." Her heart contracted at the implication. "You'll be back," she said with more confidence than she felt. Garrett nodded once, then swung into the saddle with easy grace. "Keep the fire small if you build one," he instructed. "And stay in the canyon. It's easy to defend if needed." With that, he rode away, leaving Nora alone with her thoughts and the vast silence of the desert morning. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Nora busied herself as best she could, washing her tattered dress in the stream and laying it on sun-warmed rocks to dry, inventorying Garrett's supplies, and drawing a detailed map of Redemption Springs, marking the jail, the judge's house, and all possible escape routes. As the sun reached its zenith, she retreated to the shade of the lean-to, the heat making any activity impossible. Her thoughts drifted to Garrett, wondering what kind of life had led him to this solitary existence. The war had broken many men, she knew, but there seemed to be more to his story than battlefield scars and the usual post-war disillusionment. The sound of approaching hoofbeats jerked her from a half-doze. She scrambled for Garrett's spare pistol, heart pounding as she positioned herself behind a large boulder with a clear view of the canyon entrance. Relief flooded through her as the familiar black stallion appeared with Garrett astride, though her relief quickly turned to concern when she saw him slumped slightly in the saddle. Garrett. She rushed forward as he dismounted with less than his usual fluidity. I'm all right, he said, though the bloodstain spreading across his left sleeve suggested otherwise. Just a graze. What happened? She demanded, helping him to sit on a flat rock while she examined the wound. Had a disagreement with some fellows at the trading post, he said grimly. Pike's got men looking for you and for me. Seems I've made quite an impression on the good people of Redemption Springs. Nora carefully rolled up his sleeve, revealing a deep furrow across his upper arm where a bullet had torn through the flesh. This needs stitching, she said, her teacher's authority coming through in her tone. In the saddlebag, Garrett directed, needle and thread with the medical supplies. She gathered what she needed, setting water to boil over a freshly built fire. I hope you meant it about picking up things from your father, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Because my sewing skills are limited to samplers and torn hems. His lips twitched in what might have been amusement. I can talk you through it, he assured her. Not my first bullet wound. That's not as comforting as you might think, she muttered, but set to work cleaning the injury with the boiled water. Garrett hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. Did learn anything useful, he said, clearly trying to distract himself from the pain. The hanging's still set for the day after tomorrow, but the boy's being moved to the county seat tonight. Pike doesn't trust the jail in Redemption Springs to hold him after what happened with you. When are they moving him? Nora asked, threading the needle with hands that trembled only slightly. Midnight, they're sending 4 men with the wagon. He watched as she prepared to make the first stitch. Small, even stitches, he instructed, like you're sewing fine fabric. Nora took a deep breath and began, trying to ignore Garrett's sharp intake of breath as the needle pierced his skin. So we have until midnight to come up with a plan, she said, focusing intently on her work. Actually, Garrett said, his voice tight with pain, I already have one. By the time Nora finished bandaging Garrett's arm, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. She watched with concern as he moved stiffly to retrieve something from his saddlebags. You should rest, she advised. You've lost blood. No time, he replied, pulling out a folded paper. They'll be moving the boy in a few hours. He spread what turned out to be a map on a flat rock, weighing down the corners with small stones. Here, he said, pointing to a spot where the trail from Redemption Springs crossed a dry riverbed. This is where they'll have to slow down. It's our best chance. Nora raised an eyebrow. Garrett, you're injured. You can't possibly, it'll take both of us, he interrupted. I can still shoot and you can drive the wagon once we have it. She wanted to argue but recognized the determined set of his jaw. What's the plan then? He outlined a simple but effective ambush. They would block the trail with fallen timber, forcing the wagon to stop. When the guards investigated, Garrett would get the drop on them while Nora helped Miguel escape. We're not killing anyone, she insisted when he finished explaining. Not planning to, he assured her, but I won't hesitate if they give me no choice. Nora studied his face, trying to reconcile the gentle man who had tended her wounds with this hardened fighter preparing for battle. Who are you really, Garrett Lane? She asked softly. His eyes met hers for a long moment. Someone who's trying to do better than he once did, he finally said. Isn't that enough? Before she could respond, he turned back to the map. We need to leave within the hour to set up properly. Can you ride? Nora nodded. My father taught me when I was young. She hesitated, then asked, what happens after? If we succeed in freeing Miguel, we get him to safety, Garrett said simply. There's a mission about 50 miles south of here. The priests there will help him across the border to his relatives in Mexico. And then, he glanced at her, a question in his eyes. Then you'll be free to go wherever you choose. I can get you to Tucson or Santa Fe somewhere you can start fresh. The thought of parting ways left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. What about you? She asked, not quite meeting his gaze. I'll keep moving, he said. Always do. Nora wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Instead, she began gathering what they would need for the night ahead. Trying not to dwell on the danger they were about to face or the strange connection she felt to this mysterious man who had risked everything to help her and was now prepared to do the same for a boy he'd never met. As twilight deepened into night, They rode side by side toward the ambush point, the only sound the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth and the occasional call of a night bird. Nora glanced at Garrett's profile, outlined against the star-filled sky, and wondered what would happen when this adventure ended. For the first time in years, she found herself wishing for something more than just her independence and her books. The dried riverbed Garrett had chosen for their ambush cut a wide swath through the desert, its banks high enough to provide cover, but gentle enough to allow for a quick escape if needed. They worked silently in the darkness, dragging fallen mesquite branches across the trail to create a barrier that would force the wagon to stop. "Remember," Garrett said as they finished, "stay hidden until I give the signal. If anything goes wrong, don't wait for me to take the boy and ride south." "I'm not leaving you behind," Nora replied firmly. In the moonlight, she saw his expression soften momentarily. "Just focus on getting the boy," he said, his voice gentler than before. "The rest will work itself out." They took up positions on either side of the trail, concealed among the rocks and sparse vegetation. Garrett had given Nora his spare revolver, though she prayed she wouldn't need to use it. The night grew colder as they waited, and she pulled her borrowed coat tighter around her shoulders. "Garrett," she whispered across the darkness. "Yes, thank you. No matter what happens, thank you for everything." There was a pause, then his low voice came back to her. "You're worth it, Nora Sullivan." Before she could respond, the distant sound of wagon wheels and horses' hooves reached them. Garrett signaled for silence, and they settled deeper into their hiding places. The wagon appeared around a bend in the trail, a lantern swinging from its side casting eerie shadows on the desert floor. Two men sat on the driver's bench, rifles across their laps, while two more rode alongside on horseback. Nora strained to see into the back of the wagon, finally making out a small figure huddled there, Miguel, hands bound, head bowed. The lead rider spotted the blockade and called for a halt. "What the hell?" he muttered, dismounting to investigate. "Probably just some deadfall," one of the men on the wagon said. "This time of year, the dry branches snap easy." "Check it out, Dawson," the first man ordered, hand resting on his pistol as he scanned the surrounding darkness. One of the mounted men swung down from his horse, approaching the barrier cautiously. That was when Garrett made his move, stepping out from the shadows with his rifle leveled. "Evening, gentlemen," he said conversationally. "I'm afraid this road is closed." The four men froze, their hands instinctively moving toward their weapons. "I wouldn't," Garrett advised. "I've got men in those rocks with rifles trained on each of you." It was a bluff, but in the darkness, the guards couldn't know that. They hesitated, eyes darting around nervously. "What do you want?" the apparent leader asked. "Just the boy," Garrett replied. "Hand him over peacefully and you can be on your way." One of the men on the wagon snorted. "4 of us, one of you that I can see. I don't like those odds for you." Before anyone could react, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot went wide, but it broke the standoff. Garrett dove for cover as the other men drew their weapons. Nora's heart pounded as gunfire erupted. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Keeping low, she worked her way toward the back of the wagon where Miguel was now pressed against the floorboards, terrified. "Miguel," she whispered urgently when she reached him. "It's Miss Sullivan. Come quickly." The boy's eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Sullivan." "They said you were arrested." "No time to explain," she said, helping him over the side of the wagon. "We need to run." More shots rang out, followed by a cry of pain that she desperately hoped wasn't Garrett. As she guided Miguel toward where they'd left their horses, a figure loomed suddenly before them, going somewhere. It was Dawson, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, his gun aimed directly at them. Nora pushed Miguel behind her, raising her own revolver with trembling hands. "Let us pass," she demanded. Dawson laughed. "A schoolmarm with a gun, that's rich. Step away from them." Garrett's voice came from behind Dawson, cold and dangerous. The guard started to turn, but Garrett was faster, striking him across the back of the head with his rifle butt. Dawson crumpled to the ground, unconscious. "Are you hurt?" Garrett asked, moving quickly to Nora and Miguel. She shook her head. "What about the others?" "2 ran off, one's nursing a bullet in his leg," he reported. "We need to move, they'll be back with reinforcements." He helped Miguel onto his horse, then offered Nora a hand up to join the boy. Head south, he instructed, handing her the reins. I'll catch up. What are you doing? She asked, alarmed. Creating a diversion, he replied. Go now. There was no time to argue. Nora urged the horse forward, holding Miguel securely in front of her as they galloped away from the ambush site. She glanced back once to see Garrett mounting the remaining guard's horse, heading in the opposite direction. He will be all right, Miss Sullivan. Miguel asked, his voice small and frightened. Yes, she said with more confidence than she felt. He'll be just fine. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Nora dared to slow their pace. Finding a sheltered spot among some rocks, she helped Miguel down and checked his condition. The boy was exhausted and terrified but unharmed. Are we going to Mexico? He asked as Nora gave him water from a canteen. Yes, she confirmed. To your grandmother's village, you'll be safe there. What about my brothers and sister? Nora hadn't considered this complication. Where are they now? With our neighbor, Senora Diaz, Miguel explained. She watches them while Papa works. She gnawed her lip, thinking quickly. We'll send word to your father once you're safe. He can bring your siblings to join you. The boy nodded, though worry still lined his young face. Nora kept glancing back the way they had come, hoping to see Garrett appearing out of the darkness. As minutes stretched into an hour, her anxiety grew. We should keep moving, she finally said, helping Miguel back onto the horse. We need to put more distance between us and Redemption Springs before dawn. They rode through the night, following the stars southward as Garrett had instructed. Miguel eventually fell asleep against her, his small body warm and trusting. Nora remained vigilant, straining her ears for any sound of pursuit or of Garrett catching up to them. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when she heard hoofbeats approaching from behind. She quickly guided the horse into a thicket of mesquite, drawing her revolver and positioning herself between Miguel and whatever danger approached. The rider came into view, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. Even at a distance, she recognized Garrett's broad shoulders and the distinctive way he sat a horse. Relief flooded through her, so intense it left her lightheaded. Garrett, she called, stepping out from their hiding place. He turned toward her voice, spurring his mount in her direction. As he drew closer, she could see a fresh cut across his cheekbone and what looked like powder burns on his right hand, but he was alive and seemingly whole. You're all right, she breathed as he dismounted. Takes more than a few amateur gunmen to put me down, he replied, though the tightness around his eyes suggested he was in more pain than he was admitting. His gaze moved to Miguel, still asleep on the horse. The boy, exhausted but unharmed, she reported. What happened after we left? Led them on a merry chase to the north, Garrett said, taking a drink from his canteen. Lost them in the hills, doubled back. He glanced at the lightening sky. We should keep moving. There's a place about 10 miles from here where we can rest during the day. Nora wanted to ask more questions to check his wounds properly, but knew he was right about the need to keep moving. They rode side by side as dawn broke over the desert, painting the landscape in shades of pink and gold. It's beautiful, she murmured, taking in the vast expanse of sky and land. Garrett glanced at her, something softening in his expression. Yes, he agreed, though his eyes lingered on her face rather than the scenery. Beautiful indeed. The place Garrett led them to was a small oasis tucked away in a fold of rocky hills, a hidden spring surrounded by cottonwoods and willows, offering blessed shade and cool water. Miguel woke as they arrived, his eyes widening at the unexpected green haven in the midst of the desert. We'll rest here until nightfall, Garrett announced, helping the boy down from the horse. Safer to travel after dark. While Nora helped Miguel wash up and eat some of their provisions, Garrett secured the perimeter, checking for any signs that others might know of this sanctuary. When he returned, she noticed him favoring his injured arm. Let me check that wound, she insisted. Once Miguel had settled for a nap in the shade, Garrett started to protest, but seemed to think better of it when he saw her determined expression. Yes, madam, he said with the ghost of a smile. As she unwrapped the bandage, she was relieved to see that the stitches had held despite the night's activities. You're lucky, she commented, cleaning the area gently. It could have been much worse. Had worse, he said simply. Nora's fingers traced lightly over a puckered scar near the fresh wound. "So I've seen," she murmured. "Will you tell me someday about what happened after the war?" Garrett's eyes met hers, surprise evident in their green depths. "Someday," he repeated, as if testing the word. "You plan on sticking around that long?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither was quite ready to voice. "I don't know what my plans are anymore," she admitted. "Everything's changed so quickly." He nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Plans are overrated," he offered. "Sometimes the best things in life come from having no plan at all." "Like rescuing a stubborn schoolteacher from a public flogging?" she asked with a small smile. "Exactly like that," he agreed, his own lips curving upward. As she finished rebandaging his arm, her fingers lingered longer than necessary on his skin. "Thank you," she said softly. "For Miguel, for me, for all of it." Garrett caught her hand in his calloused palm warm against her fingers. "You'd have done the same," he said with quiet certainty. "I'd like to think so," she replied, "but it takes a special kind of courage to stand against injustice when everyone else turns away." "You stood up to the judge," he reminded her, "knowing what it might cost you, and look where it got me," she said with a rueful laugh. "Here," he said simply. "With me?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. For a moment, Nora thought he might lean forward, close the small distance between them. Instead, he released her hand and stood, putting space between them once more. "You should rest too," he said, his voice gruffer than before. "Long ride ahead tonight." Nora nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that washed through her. She settled under the shade of a cottonwood, watching as Garrett moved to stand guard at the edge of their small sanctuary. Whatever was growing between them would have to wait. For now, getting Miguel to safety had to be their priority. As she drifted into sleep, Nora wondered if there would ever be a time when their lives weren't dictated by urgent necessities and looming dangers, a time when they might explore the connection that seemed to strengthen with each passing hour. The day passed in relative peace, the three of them resting in the oasis's protective embrace. By late afternoon, Garrett began preparing for the night's journey, checking their supplies and the condition of the horses. "It's about 25 miles to the mission," he explained as they ate a simple meal. "If we ride steady, we can be there before dawn." "And they'll help Miguel?" Nora asked. Garrett nodded. "Father Ignacio is a good man. He's helped others in similar situations." Miguel, who had been mostly quiet throughout the day, suddenly asked, "Will you come to Mexico too, Miss Sullivan?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know, Miguel. You could teach us there," the boy continued hopefully. "Like you did in Redemption Springs." Nora glanced at Garrett, who was carefully avoiding her gaze. "We'll see what happens," she said gently. "For now, let's focus on getting you safely to your grandmother." As twilight deepened, they mounted up once more, Miguel riding with Garrett this time to give Nora's horse a rest. They set off southward, the stars emerging one by one to guide their way. The desert night was alive with sounds, the rustling of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through mesquite and cactus, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on packed earth. They rode in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "Do you ever wish for a different life?" Nora asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Garrett considered the question for a long moment. "Used to," he finally replied. "After the war, I spent years wishing I could go back, make different choices. And now," he glanced at her, his expression thoughtful in the moonlight, "now I think maybe everything happened exactly as it needed to for me to become who I am, to be here doing this." "That's a rather philosophical view for a man who claims to live without plans," she observed with a small smile. "A man can surprise himself sometimes," he replied, returning her smile. "How about you? Do you regret becoming a teacher in a town that didn't appreciate your spirit?" Nora looked up at the vast canopy of stars stretching above them. "No," she said with certainty. "I can't regret anything that led me here." Their eyes met across the space between their horses, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Then Miguel stirred against Garrett's chest, murmuring something in his sleep, and the moment passed. They continued southward, the terrain gradually changing as they approached the border region, more rocks, deeper arroyos, stretches of barren land alternating with surprisingly lush desert growth. Garrett kept them away from established trails, clearly familiar with this wild country in a way that spoke of extensive experience. Several hours into their journey, he suddenly raised a hand, signaling for a halt. Nora reined in beside him, instantly alert. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders," he replied quietly, pointing to a distant ridge where moonlight glinted briefly on metal. "Could be Mexican rurales, could be bandits, or it could be Pike's men," she added, worry creasing her brow. Garrett nodded grimly. "We'll detour west, use that line of hills for cover." They altered their course, moving more cautiously now, pausing frequently to listen for pursuit. The detour cost them time and added miles to their journey, but by the time the eastern sky began to lighten, Garrett assured them they were close to their destination. "There," he said as they crested a small rise, pointing to a cluster of adobe buildings nestled in a valley below. San Xavier Mission. The whitewashed walls of the church gleamed in the pre-dawn light, a beacon of hope after their long night's ride. Miguel, now fully awake, straightened in the saddle, his face lighting up at the sight. "Will my grandmother be there?" he asked eagerly. "We'll send word to her village," Garrett explained. "She can probably come within a few days." They approached the mission cautiously, Garrett scanning the surrounding landscape for any sign of danger. As they entered the courtyard, a robed figure emerged from the chapel, hand raised in greeting. "Father Ignacio," Garrett called, dismounting and helping Miguel down. "We seek sanctuary." The priest, a weathered man with kind eyes and a silver-streaked beard, took in their dusty, exhausted appearance and the boy between them. "You have found it, my son," he replied, gesturing them inside. "Come quickly." Within the cool walls of the mission, they explained their situation. Father Ignacio listened gravely, his expression darkening at the mention of Judge Montgomery and the boy's unjust sentence. "You did right to bring him here," he said when they finished. "I will arrange for word to be sent to his grandmother's village today. In the meantime, you are all welcome to rest and recover." A lay brother showed them to simple guest quarters where they could wash and sleep. Nora felt the weight of the past day's events settling on her shoulders as the immediate danger passed. Now that Miguel was safe, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She was a fugitive, with no home, no job, and no clear future ahead. After washing away the dust of their journey, she found Garrett in the courtyard, speaking with Father Ignacio. They fell silent as she approached, exchanging a glance that suggested they had been discussing her. "Miguel is sleeping," she reported, settling on a stone bench beside them. "Poor boy is exhausted." "As you must be," the priest said kindly. "You have undergone quite an ordeal." "I was just explaining to Father Ignacio that you might need to stay here for a while," Garrett said, not quite meeting her eyes. "At least until we're certain Pike and his men aren't still searching for you." Nora's heart sank at his choice of words, "you not we." "And what about you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I should keep moving," he replied. "My presence here could endanger the mission if anyone tracked us this far. You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Garrett finally looked at her directly, his expression unreadable. "It's for the best." Father Ignacio cleared his throat diplomatically. "I will check on our young guest," he said, tactfully withdrawing to give them privacy. When they were alone, Nora fought to keep her composure. "When?" she asked simply. "This afternoon," Garrett said. "I want to be well away from here by nightfall." "I see." She stared down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "And where will you go?" he shrugged. "West, maybe California, or north to Colorado territory, somewhere new, always running," she observed quietly. "It's what I do best," he replied, a hint of bitterness in his tone. Nora stood abruptly. "Well, thank you for your assistance, Mr. Lane," she said formally, hurt making her voice colder than intended. "I won't keep you from your preparations." She turned to leave, but his hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. "Nora," he said, his voice low and urgent, "it's not that simple." "It seems very simple to me," she replied, not turning back to face him. "You're leaving, again, it's what you do, isn't it? Look at me," he requested softly. Reluctantly, she turned, finding him closer than expected, his green eyes troubled. "The things I've done," he began, "the life I've led, it's not one I can ask anyone to share, especially not someone like you." "Someone like me," she echoed, a spark of anger flaring. "And what exactly am I like?" Garrett Lane, some delicate flower who can't handle the realities of life. That's not, I was shackled to a post and left to bake in the desert sun, she reminded him fiercely. I helped rescue a boy from armed guards. I've ridden through the night across territory where most men fear to travel. Don't you dare treat me as if I'm some fragile creature who needs protection from hard truths. Garrett's expression shifted from surprise to something like admiration. You're right, he conceded. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, which is exactly why you deserve better than a life on the run with a man carrying as many ghosts as I do. Shouldn't that be my choice? She challenged. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. What are you saying, Nora? Her courage nearly faltered under the intensity of his gaze, but she pressed on. I'm saying that in the past 3 days, I've felt more alive, more myself than in all the years before, and that's because of you. You barely know me, he pointed out, though his voice had softened. I know enough, she insisted. I know you risked everything to help a woman you'd never met. I know you put yourself in danger to save a boy who meant nothing to you. I know that despite whatever darkness you carry, there's a good man inside you, Garrett Lane, a man I'd like the chance to know better. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, conflict evident in his expression. Then slowly, he raised a hand to her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. I can't promise you safety, he said quietly, or stability, or any of the things a woman should have. I'm not asking for promises, she replied, just a chance. The space between them seemed charged with possibility. Nora held her breath, waiting for him to make a decision to step away or to close the final distance between them. With deliberate slowness, Garrett leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. You make me want things I gave up hoping for long ago, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Good, she replied simply, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. His lips found hers then, tentative at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and second chances, of the possibility that even damaged souls could find healing in each other's arms. When they finally parted, Garrett's expression was lighter than she'd ever seen it, as if some burden had been lifted from his shoulders. So, Nora said, unable to suppress a smile, about those travel plans of yours. He laughed, a warm, rich sound that transformed his face. Suddenly, I'm thinking Colorado territory might be a nice place for 2 people to make a fresh start, he suggested. I hear they need teachers in the mining towns. And what would you do there? She asked, her fingers intertwining with his. Whatever honest work I can find, he replied. Might be nice to stay in one place for a while, put down some roots. The words were casual, but Nora understood the significance of what he was offering a man who had spent years running was willing to stop, to try building something permanent. With her, I think I'd like that, she said softly. A discreet cough from the archway drew their attention. Father Ignacio stood there, an apologetic expression on his weathered face. Forgive the intrusion, he said, but there are riders approaching from the north. Many riders. Garrett's expression immediately hardened, his hand dropping to his pistol. Pike, the priest shook his head. I do not think so. They appear to be Mexican rurales, but it would be best if you and the boy were not seen until we know their purpose. Nora and Garrett exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Whatever future they might build together would have to wait until the present dangers were resolved. We'll stay out of sight, Garrett assured the priest. Let us know when it's safe. As Father Ignacio went to meet the approaching riders, Garrett led Nora deeper into the mission complex, to a small storage room where they could remain hidden but still hear what transpired in the courtyard. If it comes to it, Garrett said quietly, checking his weapons, there's a back way out through the cemetery. Get Miguel and head south. There's a village about 15 miles from here where you can find help. We're not splitting up, Nora said firmly. Whatever happens, we face it together. The determination in her eyes must have convinced him, for he nodded once. Together, he agreed. They listened as voices drifted in from the courtyard, Father Ignacio greeting the newcomers in Spanish, their responses too muffled to make out clearly. After several tense minutes, the priest appeared at their hiding place. You can come out, he said, relief evident in his voice. "They are not looking for you. They pursue a band of cattle thieves who crossed into Mexico 3 days ago." Garrett's shoulders relaxed slightly, though he remained vigilant. "How long will they stay?" "Only long enough to water their horses and take a meal," Father Ignacio assured them. "But I have other news. A messenger has arrived from the village where Miguel's grandmother lives. She is already on her way here, expected to arrive by tomorrow evening." Nora felt a weight lift from her heart. That's wonderful news. The rest of the day passed in relative peace. The rurales departed after a brief rest, continuing their pursuit of the cattle thieves. Miguel, upon hearing that his grandmother would soon arrive, became animated for the first time since his rescue, peppering Father Ignacio with questions about the mission and helping the lay brothers with their afternoon chores. As evening approached, Nora found Garrett sitting alone in the mission garden, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of amber and gold. She settled beside him on the stone bench, their shoulders touching. "So," she said after a comfortable silence, "still planning to leave today?" He glanced at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Seems I've been persuaded to reconsider my itinerary." "A wise decision," she replied, returning his smile. "I can be very persuasive when properly motivated." "I've noticed," he said dryly, but his eyes were warm as they met hers. Nora leaned against him slightly, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "What happens after Miguel's grandmother arrives?" she asked. "Do we really head for Colorado?" Garrett considered the question, his arms slipping around her shoulders in a gesture that felt both protective and companionable. "If that's what you want," he said. "Or we could go somewhere else, California, Oregon, wherever you'd like to start fresh." "As long as we're together," she said softly. "I don't much care where we go." He turned to face her fully, his expression suddenly serious. "Are you sure about this, Nora?" "About me? You could have a normal life, find a position in a proper town, marry a respectable man who doesn't wake up reaching for his gun in the middle of the night." "I don't want normal," she replied with conviction. "I want real." "And what's between us, Garrett? That's the most real thing I've ever felt." His kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a pledge of all the days that might lie ahead. When they parted, the last light of day was fading from the sky, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue. "We should go in," Garrett said, though he made no move to rise. "It's getting cold." Nora smiled, feeling more content than she had in years. "In a minute," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder to gaze up at the emerging stars. "Let's just be here together, for a little while longer." Miguel's grandmother arrived the following afternoon, a dignified woman with silver-streaked hair and the same expressive dark eyes as her grandson. The reunion was tearful and joyous, with Miguel alternating between excited chatter about his rescue and solemn explanations about his father and siblings still in Redemption Springs. "My son will come when he can," Senora Reyes assured them after hearing the full story. "Until then, Miguel will be safe with me in our village. We'll make sure word reaches his father about what's happened," Garrett promised. "Let him know where to find you." That evening, Father Ignacio performed a simple blessing ceremony for Miguel and his grandmother before their departure the next morning. As the elderly priest spoke words of protection and guidance, Nora found herself unexpectedly moved. Standing beside Garrett in the small mission chapel, his hand warm around hers, she felt as if she too were being blessed, given a new beginning she had never dared to hope for. Later, as they walked the mission grounds under a canopy of stars, Garrett seemed pensive, his brow furrowed in thought. "What's troubling you?" Nora asked, sensing his preoccupation. He hesitated before answering. "I keep thinking about Miguel's father and siblings, still back there in Redemption Springs. Pike and Montgomery will make their lives hell once they realize we've gotten Miguel safely away." The implication of his words settled between them. "You want to go back," she said, understanding dawning. "Not to stay," he clarified quickly. "Just long enough to get word to Miguel's father, maybe help him and the other children get out safely." He stopped walking to face her directly. "But I won't do it if you don't want me to. We can head straight for Colorado, start that new life we talked about." Nora studied his face in the moonlight, recognizing the conflict within him, the desire to move forward with her warring with his sense of responsibility toward those still in danger. "We'll go together," she decided. "Help Miguel's family, then head north. It could be dangerous," he warned. "Pike will still be looking for both of us." "All the more reason not to go alone," she countered. "Besides, I left some of my favorite books behind. I'd hate to abandon them permanently." The tension in Garrett's expression eased, replaced by affectionate exasperation. "You would risk recapture for books." "Not just any books," she replied with mock seriousness. "First editions of Emerson and Thoreau. A teacher has her priorities." He laughed, the sound warming her more than any fire could. "How did I find someone as crazy as you?" he wondered aloud. "As I recall, I was chained to a post in the town square," she reminded him. "Not exactly difficult to locate." His expression sobered as he reached out to touch her wrist where faint marks still showed where the shackles had cut into her skin. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't ridden into Redemption Springs that day." "But you did," she said simply, "and here we are." "Here we are," he agreed, drawing her closer. Their kiss beneath the mission's bell tower was both a sealing of their bond and a promise of all that was to come, challenges they would face together, a future they would build side by side. 2 days later, they bid farewell to Father Ignacio and the mission that had offered them sanctuary. With supplies replenished and a rough map sketched out, they set off northward, taking a circuitous route that would allow them to approach Redemption Springs from an unexpected direction. "We'll need to be careful," Garrett explained as they rode. "Pike will have men watching all the main trails." "How will we find Miguel's father?" Nora asked. "We can't exactly walk into town and ask for him." "I've been thinking about that," Garrett replied. "There's a cantina on the outskirts of town, the Broken Spur. Lots of the Mexican workers gather there after their shifts. If we can get word to someone there, they might help us contact Senor Reyes." The journey back took nearly 5 days, as they traveled only at night and kept away from established trails. During the daylight hours, they camped in hidden locations, resting and planning their approach to Redemption Springs. These quiet days together allowed them to learn each other more deeply, Garrett gradually sharing stories from his past, including the painful years after the war when he'd ridden with a gang of former Confederate soldiers turned outlaws. He spoke of his eventual break with them, the price on his head that had forced him to keep moving, and his efforts over the past 3 years to make amends for his earlier choices. In turn, Nora told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her parents' deaths, and her determination to forge an independent life at a time when women were expected to move directly from father's house to husband's. She spoke of her love of literature and learning, and her belief that education could transform even the most troubled communities. "You still believe that?" Garrett asked one evening as they sat beside a small fire, hidden in a box canyon several miles from Redemption Springs. After what happened there, Nora considered the question seriously. "Yes," she finally said, "perhaps more than ever. It's ignorance that leads to fear and fear that leads to cruelty. If children learn to think for themselves, to question what they're told, maybe the next generation will build something better. You'll be a wonderful teacher wherever we settle," he said, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Those mining town kids won't know what hit them." She smiled at the image. "And what about you? What will Garrett Lane do in our new life?" He poked at the fire thoughtfully. "Been thinking about that. I'm good with horses, might set up as a trainer or breeder if we find the right place. Or use what skills I have with a gun for something better than fighting, maybe as a hunting guide. Or a lawman," Nora suggested. Garrett's eyebrows rose in surprise. "A man with my background, who better to uphold the law than someone who understands both sides of it," she reasoned. "Besides, you have a natural sense of justice. That's rare." He seemed genuinely touched by her faith in him. "We'll see," was all he said, but she could tell he was considering the possibility. The night they finally approached Redemption Springs was moonless and cloudy, perfect for their clandestine mission. They left their horses concealed in a stand of cottonwoods near the creek that gave the town its name, approaching on foot to avoid detection. The Broken Spur Cantina sat on the southern edge of town, a ramshackle building with light and music spilling from its open doorway. Garrett and Nora watched from the shadows, identifying the regular patrols of Pike's deputies before making their move. "Wait here," Garrett instructed, positioning Nora behind an abandoned wagon where she could observe without being seen. "I'll try to find someone who knows Ray's." "Be careful," she whispered, squeezing his hand before letting him go. Garrett adjusted his hat low over his face and moved casually toward the cantina, timing his approach between patrols. Nora held her breath as he disappeared inside, every minute of his absence stretching like an hour. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, he emerged with another man older, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who worked outdoors. They spoke briefly before parting, Garrett making his way back to her hiding place while the other man headed toward the Mexican quarter of town. "That was Emilio, Miguel's uncle," Garrett explained in a low voice as he crouched beside her. "He's going to bring Ray's to us at the old mission ruins outside town in an hour. Did you tell him about Miguel? Just that the boy is safe with his grandmother." "I figured the fewer details shared in town, the better." They made their way carefully to the abandoned mission, a crumbling adobe structure that had been the town's first church before a larger one was built closer to the square. Its walls provided good cover while offering multiple escape routes if needed. As they waited in the darkness, Nora found herself thinking of the last time she'd been in Redemption Springs, standing defiant but terrified as the townspeople jeered, and the sun baked her skin. It seemed both a lifetime ago and just yesterday. "Having second thoughts?" Garrett asked quietly, noticing her pensive expression. "No," she assured him, "just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time." He nodded, understanding, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "For the better, I hope." "Definitely for the better," she confirmed, squeezing his fingers. The sound of approaching footsteps brought them both to alertness. Garrett positioned himself protectively in front of Nora, hand on his revolver until he recognized Emilio accompanying a younger man with Miguel's same dark eyes and solemn expression. "Senor Reyes," Garrett greeted him quietly, "thank you for coming. You have news of my son." Reyes asked without preamble, his English accented but clear. Nora stepped forward. "Miguel is safe with your mother in Mexico," she assured him. "We helped him escape before they could move him to the county seat." Relief washed over the man's face, his shoulders sagging slightly. "Thank God," he whispered, "and thank you, both of you." "There's more," Garrett said. "Pike and the judge will likely make trouble for you once they realize Miguel is beyond their reach. We came back to help you get your other children to safety as well." Reyes nodded gravely. "This I have feared. Already the sheriff has been to question me to watch my house." "How many children?" Nora asked. "3," Reyes replied. "Lucia is 10, the twins Javier and Rosa are 7, Garrett considered this information. "We need to move quickly, tonight if possible." "Can you have them ready within the hour?" Reyes hesitated. "My work at the mine, the children's few possessions." "Your life and freedom are worth more than possessions," Garrett said firmly. "And there's work in Mexico too." After a moment's further consideration, Reyes nodded. "See, we will be ready, but how will we travel? I have no horse, no wagon." "We have horses," Garrett assured him. "And I'll acquire a wagon before we leave. Meet us at the old Willow Bend, south of town, in 2 hours." As Reyes and his brother-in-law departed to prepare the children, Nora turned to Garrett with raised eyebrows. "Acquire a wagon," he had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Borrow," he amended, "from someone who can afford the loss. Judge Montgomery, for instance." Nora tried to maintain a disapproving expression but couldn't quite manage it. "I suppose that would be poetic justice," she conceded. "Exactly," Garrett agreed, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Now let's get back to the horses. I have a wagon to borrow." The next 2 hours were a blur of tense activity. While Nora waited with their horses at the designated meeting place, Garrett slipped back into town. He returned driving a small but sturdy wagon, looking rather pleased with himself. "Montgomery's prized buggy," he explained with satisfaction. Left him a note saying it was payment for unjust sentencing practices. "You didn't," Nora gasped, torn between horror and amusement. "Signed it too," he confirmed. Figure we'll be well into Mexico before he finds it, and it'll give him something to remember us by." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of Reyes and his children. The little ones looked sleepy and confused, clutching small bundles of possessions. Lucia, the eldest, maintained a protective stance beside her younger siblings, her expression far too serious for a child her age. "Quickly now," Garrett urged, helping them into the wagon. "We need to be across the border by dawn." With Reyes and the children secured in the wagon and Emilio mounted on Garrett's horse, they set off southward, leaving Redemption Springs behind. Nora rode beside the wagon, occasionally catching Garrett's eye as he handled the reins. Despite the danger and uncertainty of their situation, she felt an overwhelming sense of rightness that this, helping others find their freedom, was exactly what they were meant to be doing together. As dawn broke on the horizon, they crossed into Mexico, the invisible line that separated one nation from another, bringing visible relief to Reyes and his brother-in-law. The children, having slept for most of the journey, began to stir, their young faces brightening as their father explained they were going to see their grandmother and Miguel. "What now?" Nora asked as they paused to rest the horses near a small stream. Garrett looked thoughtfully toward the southern horizon. "We get them to the village, make sure they're settled safely. Then," he turned to meet her gaze, "then we head north to Colorado like we planned." "Together," she said softly. "Together," he confirmed, reaching across to take her hand. As they continued their journey, Nora Sullivan reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led her here, from being shackled to a post in disgrace to finding freedom, purpose, and love in the arms of a man who had cut her bonds and simply said, "She's with me." The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise, a new life they would build together, day by day, choice by choice. And whatever challenges awaited, she knew they would face them side by side, bound by something stronger than any chain or shackle. The love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of circumstances, under the vast and unforgiving sky of the American West. 5 years later, the town of Silverdale, Colorado Territory, was celebrating its annual Founders' Day picnic. The small mining community had flourished in recent years, growing from a rough camp to a proper town with a school, a church, and even a weekly newspaper. At the center of the festivities was the schoolhouse, a sturdy log building with real glass windows, a source of pride for the townspeople. Children raced across the grounds, playing games and enjoying the rare day without lessons, while their parents socialized over tables laden with home-cooked food. Inside the schoolhouse, Nora Lane arranged books on newly built shelves, humming softly to herself. The town council had finally approved funds for a small library addition, fulfilling a dream she'd nurtured since arriving in Silverdale 4 years earlier. "Still working on a holiday," came a familiar voice from the doorway. "Some things never change." Nora turned with a smile to find her husband leaning against the doorframe, their 3-year-old daughter perched on his shoulders. "I want everything perfect for Monday's unveiling," she explained, brushing dust from her hands as she approached them. "Besides, someone has to maintain standards around here, Sheriff Lane." Garrett's badge caught the sunlight as he shifted their daughter to his arms. "Speaking of standards, this young lady has been asking for her mama for the past hour, something about promised ice cream." Little Emma Lane, with her father's green eyes and her mother's determined spirit, nodded emphatically. "You promised, Mama," she reminded Nora solemnly. "So I did," Nora agreed, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead before rising on tiptoes to give Garrett a more lingering greeting. "And I always keep my promises." As they walked outside to join the celebration, several townspeople called greetings. Mayor Thompson waved them over to the main table, where he was deep in conversation with the owner of the largest silver mine in the area. "Lane," he called jovially. "Just the man I wanted to see. Henderson here has news from the territorial capital." Garrett handed Emma to Nora with a questioning look. "Official business on a holiday, go on," she encouraged. "Emma and I will find that ice cream. Duty calls sheriff." With a quick kiss to her cheek, Garrett moved to join the men, his posture straightening slightly as it always did when he was engaged in his official capacity. Nora watched him go with pride, still sometimes amazed at how naturally he had taken to the role of lawman once they'd settled in Silverdale. "Mrs. Lane." Nora turned to find Maria Rodriguez approaching with her own children in tow. Maria and her husband Pablo had been among the first friends they'd made in Silverdale, arriving just months after Nora and Garrett had established themselves in the growing community. "The library looks wonderful," Maria said, gesturing toward the schoolhouse. "Pablo says the shelves he built are the finest work he's ever done." "They're perfect," Nora agreed, "and filled with books thanks to all those donations you helped organize." As the women chatted, Emma squirming impatiently in her arms, Nora's gaze kept returning to Garrett across the schoolyard. She watched as he listened intently to whatever news the mine owner was sharing, his expression thoughtful. 5 years had changed him in subtle ways. The haunted look that had once shadowed his eyes was mostly gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who had found his place in the world. His hair now bore threads of silver at the temples, and laugh lines had largely replaced the worry lines on his face. "He's a good man," Maria commented, following Nora's gaze. "The whole town knows we're lucky to have him as sheriff." "I'm the lucky one," Nora replied softly. Maria smiled knowingly. "So you say, but I think it goes both ways. You two found each other when you needed it most." She glanced down at Emma, who was now actively trying to escape toward the promised ice cream, and gave us all a reminder that new beginnings are always possible. Later that evening, as twilight painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Nora and Garrett sat on the porch of their small house on the edge of town. Emma had finally succumbed to exhaustion after the day's excitement, tucked safely in her bed with her favorite rag doll. "Henderson had interesting news," Garrett said, his arm comfortably around Nora's shoulders as they rocked gently in the porch swing he'd built for her last birthday. "Oh," she prompted, nestling closer against him in the cooling evening air. Word came from Arizona territory. Judge Montgomery was removed from the bench corruption charges, apparently, and Sheriff Pike was killed in a shootout with cattle rustlers last month. Nora absorbed this information thoughtfully. "How do you feel about that?" Garrett considered the question. "Relieved, mostly," he admitted. "I've always worried they might somehow track us here, cause trouble for us or the town." "That was a long time ago," she reminded him, "and we're different people now." He nodded, his fingers absently tracing patterns on her shoulder. Henderson also mentioned that the territorial governor is recommending Silverdale become the county seat when Colorado achieves statehood. If that happens, they'll need more than a town sheriff. "County marshal has a nice ring to it," Nora observed, looking up to gauge his reaction. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Would mean more responsibility, less time at home, but more opportunity to do good," she countered. "To ensure justice is served properly. You think I should consider it if it's offered?" Nora turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to frame his face. "I think you should do whatever feels right to you, but know that Emma and I are proud of you, no matter what title you carry." He caught her hands, pressing a kiss to each palm. "Have I told you lately how grateful I am that I rode into Redemption Springs that day? You might have mentioned it," she teased. "Once or twice. Best decision I ever made," he said seriously, "cutting you free saying those words. She's with me," Nora quoted softly. "Little did you know what you were getting yourself into." Garrett laughed, the sound still her favorite melody after all these years. "Oh, I had some idea," he countered. "Even then, I could see that fierce spirit of yours, knew you'd either be the making of me or the end of me." "And which was it?" she asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. He gathered her closer, his lips brushing her forehead, her cheek, and finally finding her mouth in a kiss that still held all the promise of their first embrace at the mission so many years ago. "The beginning," he murmured against her lips. "You were always my beginning." As stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky above their home, Nora Lane reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a dusty town square where she stood defiant in chains to this peaceful porch in a community that respected and valued them both. It hadn't always been easy, building this life together, but every challenge had only strengthened the bond between them. "I love you, Garrett Lane," she whispered, the words both a declaration and a promise. "And I love you, Nora Lane," he replied, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had found his true north, a woman whose courage had matched his own, whose faith had helped him find redemption, and whose love had given him the home he'd stopped believing was possible. Together, they sat in contented silence as night fell completely, wrapped in the warmth of their shared life and the knowledge that the best chapters of their story were still being written, day by day, under the vast and endless Colorado sky.